And
what is Moore's law?
I hope you guys learned something. Moore's law is the idea that it's the idea that everything's getting smaller. Moore's law
That you can fit more
What?
Moore is one of the founders of
transistors on.
Moore is one of the founders of Intel.
Okay.
And he wrote this paper, which basically seems completely ridiculous because he started with basically just these 3 points down here, and he was like, "Oh, I predict that for the next few decades, it's going to continue doubling the number of transistors
every
processor."
every year and a half.
18 months.
Yeah,
It's every 18 months.
How much heat did
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's not a physical law.
Uh-huh.
It's an economic prediction,
Oh.
which the industry has
It's starting to
not so coincidentally been able to keep up with. I mean, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
How do you ensure that VDD is exactly 1 volt?
There's lots of interesting schemes.
Okay.
So the thing is that the smaller these transistors get, the farther away it seems like you need to get VDD to all of these on the processor. You know, like millions of transistors on the processor. There's lots of different ways to do it. There's many noise problems because, digital is great, but you have to go back to the analog world sometimes to solve your problems. And so with all this switching, with all these switches, you get little ringing on VDD and everything. But the way to avoid it is basically you just have tons of rows of VDD, and you have nice standardized layouts of where VDD goes in your cells, so you can just stick them together.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a very complicated problem, to be honest. Yeah.
How much heat do they produce?
A ridiculous amount of heat. It's hotter than your so energy density of these chips is higher than an electric stove. They're approaching nuclear reactor
So is that the limiting factor now for more
energy densities. Definitely, that's one of them. Cooling the chips is a huge problem. As you know, these laptops get ridiculously hot. That's a little processor in there that's just switching all these switches, an insane amount, just millions of times per second, and switching millions of them at millions of times a second. So you're losing all this power, which is a big deal for energy because, I hope this is right, but I think in a few years, the energy lost in transistor switching and leakage is going to be on the same order of magnitude as cars. Those giant server banks at Google, they're all made of these processors. So every time you do a Google search, you're switching millions of tiny little switches. Yeah, exactly. Cooling is definitely a big deal.
Whoa.
Yeah.
In 1 minute, can you explain how quantum computing is going to change all of this?
Quantum computing is not going to change any of this for a long time.
Really? Okay.
Quantum computing. I'm actually glad that you bring that up because
What is
the digital. That I'm not going to be able to do in 1 minute. The digital logic standard that I talked about. I mean, it's easy to think about binary ones and zeros as the natural way that logic works.
Yeah.
But quantum is another example of a totally different system.
Yeah.
And if we end up figuring out quantum computing, it's not binary anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, it's 3, but it's really weird and
Both
that's not gonna happen for a while, but that's what everybody says about all innovations. So.
They got a 6-qubit one working.
Okay, yes, they probably stored
Yeah.
information but actually chaining them together, it's very difficult. So, yes, exciting.
When they were doing the first computer layout, they obviously didn't have computers. So were they laying out the transistors by hand?
They actually laid out transistors by hand through the 70s, maybe. I mean, that's kind of a really funny thing, is that to lay out these processors, you need computers that are more powerful than the computers that we have.
Really?
Yeah. So it's kind of this weird paradox where you need to make the faster computer in order to design the faster computer. But as you can imagine, when you're laying out a processor with these millions of cells, with all these little transistors, you need hundreds of people working on it. And really, as big a problem as power is verification of this. Is how do you make sure that you didn't mess up? So there have been Intel
It
chips.
did mess up recently.
Yeah, Intel chips have shipped where there was like one transistor wrong, and it caused like a carry error, you know, on some ridiculously minute case, and it cost them just millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, yeah. All right. I guess that's it.
So, that was awesome. Well played. Both Plumbers and
Should
Charlie.
give the introductory lecture for E40, Charlie.
Yeah.
That's